Being unsure on whether or not a fallen person is safe to lift often leads care staff to default to calling an ambulance, when in fact the fallen person may well be safe to lift or move.
HelpFall is a digital post-falls decision-making tool that supports you to safely assess a person who has fallen and helps you decide whether to assist them from the floor using safe manual handling techniques and equipment.
So, good afternoon everyone. Welcome to this webinar on demonstrating HelpFall, the new standard in post-falls decision making. This webinar has been set on in response to when we first launched HelpFall a few months ago. Had a lot of questions, so we decided we'd create a webinar to answer those and actually do a live demonstration of the tool for you. Before we start, a few quick housekeeping points. We anticipate this webinar will be about an hour long. And if you need to jump off at any point, we fully understand. This webinar is being recorded and the recording will be sent round with the slides afterwards. Everyone is joined with their mics muted and their cameras off, but you can indeed ask questions in the Q&A section, and we will answer those live at the end of the webinar. So, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Grant, who's going to talk about why a post-falls solution is needed.
Very good. So yes, I'm Grant. So starting from a kind of holistic overview of kind of the background and what's led to this point, well aware that the audience out there is well versed in the falls area, if you like, but as we all know, falls are a cause of a huge amount of pressure on the NHS. Annually, millions of pounds are spent on dealing with fallers, and so what has been really encouraging to see is the increased sort of focus that there's been at a national level, NHS England, with their going further for winter policy and indeed the funding. So it really does demonstrate, and we're indeed excited about it because it's a drum we've been banging for quite some time. But the pressure from falls is really exacerbated at the moment as we move into winter, but this problem is not going to go away in the sense that the population is getting older, and the demand on the emergency services is growing at an ever increasing rate. So we have, I think what we're all aware of is that a new approach is needed. And as an organisation, we set a vision to eliminate ambulance call-outs to non-injury falls. So we're basically saying that we don't want to see another ambulance go out to somebody that's had a minor or no injury fall. We don't, as with everyone, we're not alone in our viewpoint. That isn't the best way that we can be dealing with fallers in the community. And we do a lot of work with ICBs in terms of a sort of system-wide approach to their falls response. And yes, you can equip more people to lift a fallen person, but the big thing that we've been coming up against more and more is that the real big challenge, if you like, is the hesitancy of the caregiver to actually lift the person. And that's mainly because they don't feel confident, they don't feel supported that they're making the correct decision. So it leads to that challenge that we are always up against, is calling 999 just as a matter of precaution or wanting to be sure that what we're doing is the correct thing. So that leads us on very well to the next part, which is indeed HelpFall. I'm going to pass over to Natalie, who's been very heavily involved in the creation of the tool. And Natalie, you can give us a bit more of an overview.
Okay, very good. Just to move on to the next slide for us, Ruben, what is HelpFall? So Grant's outlined the growing problem that falls represent for systems, and what we want to do today is to show you how we brought together a group of experts to create the new standard for post-falls decision support tools. So let's introduce you to HelpFall. First of all, what is the purpose? Well, the purpose of HelpFall is to support non-clinical staff in settings like care homes, domiciliary care agencies, to make an informed decision about whether a service user who has fallen is indeed safe to be lifted from the floor or not. And while a lot of good work has been done in the area of post-falls decision making and indeed in falls prevention, as Grant's outlined, it's been really clear from our work with ICBs that there was more to be done, particularly around giving care staff confidence to make that decision. So what we've done with HelpFall is we're building on the good work of the South Western Ambulance Service, who a number of years ago put out a paper-based system called the Post-Falls Guidance Pack for Care Providers. And with their permission, we've developed that into a digital tool, drawing on a range of latest guidance from NICE, the National Patient Safety Agency, and also input from quite a broad range of leading clinicians in the space. Most important of all is we've tested it with end users. So as we've said, it's primarily designed to be used by staff in care homes, domiciliary care settings, but it does potentially have an application in community response, as you'll see as we go through. So to give you a little bit of an overview on how it works, it uses a basic traffic light system, as you can see on the slide there, and it categorises falls into major, minor, and no injury. You will see that it includes minor injury. There are tools out there that will just assess for your major injury. We thought it was really important, particularly with the growing number of community services that are there to be called on for falls response, that was potentially an area that minor injury could be referred to. You will also see that the major, minor, and no injury exactly aligns with the 3 levels of falls response that's been set out in the NHSE guidance going further for winter that Grant mentioned. So that's a little bit about how it works. What we also wanted to do is to actually give you a live run through of the product to give you a bit of a feel for how it works in practice. So Andrew here is going to have had a fall for us. Appreciate that this isn't a totally lifelike scenario, but hopefully it will help you understand how it works in principle. So I have got a tablet or smartphone, and I have got a QR code that I've got on, in this case, on my Razor bag, and I'm going to use that to QR scanner on my phone to scan the QR code here, and that will take me through to the tool on screen, like so. So I've got the screen up. Now I'm just going to pop in my access code. There we go. Okay, so I can now start my assessment. So Andrew's on the floor. Obviously, he's one of our service users, so I know him well. Had an initial chat with him, and I can see that he is fully alert as usual, and his breathing pattern is normal. That's where the assessment starts. You will notice from the screen here that you've got the traffic light system showing. So I can see that I'm starting by checking for any signs of major injury or symptoms here. So I'm going to go through the set of questions. Very simple, yes, no. So happy, Andrew is conscious and breathing as normal. You will notice that we have a range of helpful hints. And these have been written to guide or further explain questions to help guide that decision making by care staff. So I can see that in this case, it's asking me if there's severe or uncontrollable bleeding, but then it's actually giving me an explanation of what that means in practice. Now, I can see in this scenario that Andrew has got a cut on his head, but I'm comfortable that that doesn't represent severe or uncontrollable bleeding. So I can safely say no to that. This one is asking about various forms of head injury. So I'd be saying to Andrew, have you got any new pain in your neck or back at all?
No.
All right, that's good. I can see that Andrew hasn't got any of the obvious signs of skull fracture, like swelling or bruising around an eye, behind an ear. Andrew, am I right in thinking that you fell trying to get out of bed?
Yeah, I think I tripped on the slippers.
All right, okay, that's fine. So I can see he hasn't fallen from a height of 1 metre or more. He hasn't hit his head. Confident that although we have got a skin wound on the forehead, he hasn't sustained any major head injury. So we can say no to that one. This is asking about signs and symptoms of a heart attack. So Andrew, any chest pain at all?
No, none at all.
All right, good. Feeling sick at all?
No.
That's good. So comfortable with no signs of a heart attack being shown here. Stroke, this one uses the FAST test, commonly used in care settings. So perhaps here I would ask Andrew to raise both arms for me and hold them there for me. That's good. I can see Andrew speaking nice and clearly, no slurred speech. So comfortable, there's no signs of a stroke. This one's about checking for hip fracture. So here I would perhaps ask Andrew if he could put both these legs out straight for me, lift them up, that's good. I can see there's no obvious deformities there, so that's great. No new hip pain at all, pain in your legs?
No.
Great, that's good. And then finally checking for seizure. Now this is a good example of where the helpful hints have been written very clearly with the intended audience in mind. So we've taken, we've got input from clinicians on what the typical presentation of a seizure or post-seizure would be in older people, because obviously that's different according to your age group. I can check that, comfortable, there's no signs there. And you will notice now that I have dropped from major injury into the minor injury section. So that shows me that I haven't seen any new major injury or symptoms so far. So this is a list of symptoms that might represent a minor injury. Now I can see in this scenario that Andrew has had a cut to his head. It is a skin wound, it's not deep. But in this scenario, I would have to say, yes, there is new cuts to his head. So I would select yes to this one. And you can now see it says you have reported a new minor injury. So it now tells me what I should do based on the findings of my assessment. So it says that I should give Andrew some first aid for his cut. And then the good news is, Andrew, we can lift you from the floor. We can get you back on your feet.
Thanks.
And then what I will do is just contact the community provider just for some follow-up, see if we perhaps need to do an onward falls referral. What I can do at this point is get Grant to come and help us get Andrew from the floor. And while Grant is doing that, I'm going to complete a report, fill in a report and get that emailed to me. And what I will do is do that now, and then I'll be able to show that to you in a couple of minutes while Grant's raising him from the floor.
So very simply, you're probably all familiar with the razor chair. We're just going to ask Andrew to lift his knees, and then with the seat unit, we'll slide that in there. Like so. Make it firm up against the thighs and roughly central. And then in this backpack here, you can see there's a really simple, clear guide on how you would actually use it. And then in terms of the components, you've got 2 backrests, which are completely identical. And then you've got 4 of these lifting arms. So if we just start by, Andrew, if I can just ask you to cross your arms, like so. And then it's quite important in terms of the positioning. So put one side of the seat unit, and then just encourage with one hand to roll away from you and slide it in. Now, I totally get that this is quite a mock-up scenario, but let's say there was a bath or something the other side, so I didn't have access. I can encourage Andrew to roll towards me and pop the other backrest in. And then these 4 different lifting arms just slot in, each time giving us a confirmation tone. say that it's done correctly. Makes a slightly different noise, which indicates we're safe to lift. And then it's just simply a case of supporting the head. If you head up slightly, I'll hold that. And then we're just going to press the up arrow, like so. So it's going to keep going up. You're going to see here. Like so. You're okay to support your head. So it's often wise to, once they've come up a little bit, they may need to get their bearings again. So you can stop at any point. Make sure they've got their, they know what they're doing. You can maybe go and get them a cup of tea, and then you can continue on with the rest of the lift. Maybe with a Zara Steady or some form of walking frame in front of them to steady them, and then keep going. So you can see it will bring Andrew into quite a high perching position. Obviously, you can stop wherever it is suitable for the client, and then you're okay to mobilise away from there. So one point just to make a note of is that it definitely is it can be a single person lift. There was nobody helping. I can see there's a question just come in there. What is the max weight that it will lift? 150 kg, 23.6 stone or something is the exact answer for that. We will come on to the rest of the questions and things at the end.
And so you can see now that I have filled in my report. I got this emailed over to my work email address, and I now have a nice report that I can put onto Andrew's record. Clearly sets out the circumstances of the fall, things like contributing factors, where it happened, what time of day, where he was, what he was doing, as well as a record of my assessment showing what injuries were or weren't apparent, and then what I've done as a result of that. So in this case, we've lifted Andrew using the razor. We're going to deal with the cut to his head, perhaps give him some pain relief, and then observe for 24 hours or contact a community provider for follow-up. So that's an example of the report that the care staff can get once they've completed their assessment. So I'll hand back to you, Grant, now.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Nancy. We'll just bring up the slides again. There we are. So one thing we very much aware of is that HelpFall is not the only tool out there. There's other tools out there that exist, all aiming for the same outcome, whether they're effectively better left on the floor or lifted up. And in the work that I referred to, we do in care homes earlier, what we tried to do in the creation of HelpFall was overcome some of the issues we'd come aware of. So wider then, in terms of what the actual benefits of this tool actually are. So from a patient perspective, most important, by simply allowing the carers to, or aiding the carers to give a correct and timely response, it obviously massively reduces the chance that that resident is going to experience a long lie and the inevitable outcomes that come off that. And ultimately, the chances of them having to be admitted to hospital are going to be greatly reduced, so they can stay in their place of care. Then from a care home staff or other service point of view, there's another few different benefits that we're seeing there. So because we've developed this with care home staff, I guess that's a large part as to why it's easy to use. And one thing that we'll come on to the pilot and the testing that we've done in a minute, but one thing that we found out from doing the pilot that was almost an unexpected outcome was that the ability for HelpFall to send that report through to an email after they've recorded their findings, that's kind of one of the biggest levers in terms of their confidence, because effectively what they're saying is that if they're challenged, let's say after they've responded to the fall, they've got something to refer to at the point of fall and at the point of their response. This was the correct thing to have done, and they've got proof that they did the relevant checks. And then from a wider sort of ICB or system level, Obviously, by simple intervention in reducing long lies and making sure those that can get up are being gotten up, it's reducing those long lies and subsequently the cost savings and putting vast quantities of ambulance hours back into the system. If we could just have the next slide, I just wanted to show something else from a system-wide point of view. We've gone through some of the data collection already. So the one I wanted to draw on was just the one on the right-hand side there. It says sample at the bottom. So this is a example of the kind of reporting that we can do for an ICB. So quarterly at the moment for North East Essex, which is where we've piloted this, we are providing them with a quarterly update, which will give them all sorts of information like total number of falls, how many within each category, and then it will benchmark it in terms of the percentage reduction in ambulance call-outs against a given standard. Obviously, prevention work's a big part here, and the insights box that you can see is interesting in the sense that from the data, we can pull out some information like, okay, the majority of the falls are happening at night or they're happening in the bathroom. And then that encourages the thinking like, what can we actually do to prevent those happening in the first place? I'm now going to hand over to Natalie again, just on compliance.
Very good. So obviously, with the reporting and so on, when we're talking about personal information and patient safety, it is really, really important that we're doing it right. So we're really pleased that HelpFall is compliant with NHS DTAC, which is a comprehensive set of standards that all digital health technologies should meet in order to be adopted by systems. Just wanted to touch briefly on two areas of DTAC, the first being data protection. So the bottom line result of the process that we've gone through is that HelpFall is fully compliant with GDPR. We have a nominated data protection officer. We have a data protection impact assessment. And then on clinical safety, we've gone through a process to identify and mitigate any hazards to patient safety. And we're obviously happy to discuss the sort of compliance aspect in more detail in the context of implementation across a specific system. So just wanted to say a word on compliance there.
Thanks very much for that, Natalie. The next part is around how ICBs are using HelpFall. Now, I'm afraid Mark Shorter from Suffolk and North East Essex hasn't been able to join us today. He's actually presenting in another forum about this very same topic. But we actually sat down with him a few weeks ago and reviewed the pilot in North East Essex with the Razor Chair and HelpFall. And this video really captures that sort of in a nutshell from both the ICB's point of view and also from the point of view of one of the care homes. So we'll now play this short video for you.
We were seeing an increased amount of people, unfortunately, going into hospital from ambulance conveyance from care homes with falls. Falls is one of the highest reasons for being conveyed into hospital. The kind of default process for a lot of the care homes was to call 111 999 and get those people seen by an ambulance crew.
So before we had the Razor 2 and HelpFall would just purely be a judgment call, but then it would result more than likely in a 999 call.
Particularly since COVID, we are seeing much more delayed response times, even for the higher category calls within our area. So it's really important that we do as much work as possible to reduce the stress on the ambulance service so that they can respond to the people that really need it at the time they really need it. So we received some national funding from NHS England on a recurrent basis to support the ageing well policies within the North East Essex and Suffolk area. The reason that we chose HelpFall to roll out across our system was because A, it's really simple and easy to use. The QR code is actually on the razor chair that the carer is about to actually use. Secondly, the questioning was worded in a really, again, simplified way that makes sense for the person who's actually conducting the assessment of the patient. So the report that actually goes back to the provider, giving very clear guidance on what decisions were made during that process, following of course the NICE guidelines, and now it's that so what element. So even though you've done that assessment, yes, someone may be hurt and it may not be safe to pick that person up, but do you have to call 999? Maybe not. And where it gives the information about the UCR services so that they can respond in an urgent community response way, then that really helps support our system moving forward.
So since we've had the razor chair, we have had a few times where we've had to use it. We've had a time where a lady basically her legs had given way and she needed to be lowered to the floor. I did use HelpFall to obviously ensure that I was doing the right thing before manoeuvring the lady. By going through all the checks, I noticed that it was okay for me to stand her. So we used the razor 2 to stand, and then obviously we transferred from the razor to her chair. But yeah, and then I filled out the report and sent that over to our email. It is helpful. It is really good, and it takes a lot of stress off of us. Obviously the HelpFall gives us that little bit more reassurance when it comes to our decision of moving.
We have targeted this pilot at the top 20 care homes that had the most amount of falls, and the impact has been significant. We've seen an 84% reduction in ambulance call-outs to care homes that have been using this HelpFall app with the razor chair, which is a phenomenal achievement so far. But also, really importantly, there's been a reduction in the no abnormality conveyance rate. So no abnormality conveyances are generally for people that have been taken into the emergency department to be checked over and sent home with possibly nothing more than a letter to their GP just to say that that person has fallen. And that has reduced from 27% to 0% for these care homes using the HelpFall app. So that really does save a huge amount of time, not only for the crews and the conveyancing, those people at the front door of hospital, then all the discharge team. This is a huge process that takes a lot of time and logistics. So on top of that, the benefit for the patient is they've not had to go into hospital, they've been able to stay at their home. We've also seen an 80% reduction in the amount of ED attendances for care homes for falls with the ones using this particular system. So right across our board, we're making a really big change here with a really simple tool. We've just had our letter from NHS England around community falls responses. So we're really trying to figure out now as a system how we roll things out in the best way, using the funds appropriately for our community. And I think the HelpFall app, being available to all of our care homes across not only Suffolk but North East Essex as well, will really enable a short, sweet, simple decision-making process that will hopefully reduce the amount of people being conveyed to hospital. So it's a very simple thing that could have quite a significant impact on our system.
But just wanted to dwell on a couple of the points there that were raised in terms of the statistics, because yes, you can prove anything with numbers, but what we have seen here is absolutely phenomenal. So we've seen an 84% reduction, as Mark mentioned, in the ambulance call-outs to care homes for falls, which is obviously phenomenal in itself. But I think one thing that isn't often reported on, typically because it's been hard to do so, but with the reporting of HelpFall, it's now possible. Is that the percentage of no abnormality conveyances has drastically reduced. So that's when you've got somebody that's being taken to hospital simply just to be checked over. And what we're seeing is that that has reduced down from from 27% of the time down to 0%. So we're only sending those that need to go to hospital, and there's no one blocking up the ED department that doesn't need to be there. So the next part of the, we're nearly done. If you've got any questions and answers, keep putting them in the chat and we'll come on to those. But how do you actually get HelpFall within your organisation? Very much depends on how you're planning to roll it out. Let's say it's a single dom care agency or a UCR team where there's going to be very few licenses, then you'd encourage them to maybe just register on the website, or set them up with their account and access code, send them their QR code and help them with their training. Where it's a wider sort of system-wide implementation, then it is a different process. We wouldn't expect every care home or whatever to go onto the website. It's just simply a case of working with you as an ICB, you sending us the data, an Excel sheet, we'll import it, and everybody will get allocated their access code, and we'll sort the delivery and training of the tool. One of the questions that came up ahead of this webinar was around pricing. Now, due to the demand that we've seen as a net result of launching it, sort of along with the policy that went out from NHS England where they recommended it, we've seen a vast increase in uptake. So there is likely to be a small charge for the service. It's currently being assessed on like a case-by-case basis, if you like, and we will publish the pricing strategy or policy in the new year once we've got a little bit clearer as to what we're looking at in terms of the cost implication for us this end. So now we're going to move on to the live Q&A. Natalie, you may as well join me here. Some of these questions. First, we're just going to go through the some of the questions that were put in terms of when they registered. So what are the limitations to HelpFall? So it's a really interesting question because yes, there are some. One that I can think of is due to the very nature of the tool being designed to assess whether somebody's safe to lift or not. It does not ignore, but it doesn't put attention on maybe some of the ongoing process, like checking whether they've had a medical review or that sort of thing. It's simply saying, are they best left on the floor or are they best lifted up? What other limitations are you thinking of?
Yeah, I think one other that I'd mention is obviously the typical service user living in a care home is increasingly living longer with more complex or multiple health conditions. What we've tried to do with HelpFall is create a really solid generic tool that covers the majority of scenarios that care staff are likely to encounter. There is potential possibly for further personalisation based on comorbidities and so on in the future.
Yeah, and another one I would just say is due to the tool being so new, there's a technical word, interoperability of the system into, so effectively how it integrates into other systems is limited at the moment. Obviously it sends a PDF through to the email address that they have put in, and that can obviously be updated to patient records and things, but in terms of its active talking through to, I don't know, let's say system 1 or something, that's very much in the pipeline for development, but not there yet. Next question, how is data recorded? On for you.
Yeah, great question. So to give you a bit of a summary, there's no data stored on the user's device. So as soon as they submit the report, it's cleared, all data is cleared from their device, so no patient data stored. It then goes through a secure email server, which again has been set up to meet NHS secure email standards. It's then transmitted in encrypted format and stored in encrypted format as well. I hope that gives you a bit of a...
Yeah, that's good. And there was one question which we'll cover off briefly, but I guess it's was the whole purpose of the tool. But one of the things was lots of care homes have concerns around not calling, in this case, London Ambulance Service, and making the wrong decision, causing injury to the patient. Well, that is exactly what this tool is trying to solve, increasing their confidence that they're doing the right thing.
And I think the other thing on that is the feedback that we've had from users is pretty good evidence that it's giving them that confidence to make that informed choice without relying on the 999.
Yeah, and then the next question, are medicines taken into account with frequent fallers? Does the tool highlight the potential need for a medication review to decide if they are a contributing factor? Have you got anything to say on that?
No, I guess that probably plays into the earlier point around sort of greater personalisation. As we said, the purpose of the tool is making that informed decision on whether to lift somebody. We briefly touched on customisation. That's an area where potentially there might be some development through some customisation of the tool.
Yeah, that's good. I don't know if we even mentioned it when we were talking about the fact that the advice that the caregiver is given once they come out of the algorithm can actually be customised depending on what the system wants. So, for example, let's take Herefordshire as one of an example. If they want the guidance to specifically signpost this particular patient through to a certain pathway or a certain number, you can customise that page so that it's pointing people to the right direction rather than just generic. I think that's probably covered it on the questions that come in before, but let's just open up the chat and see. There's probably a few that have come through. So a question there from Nick Williams: could you ask the fallers to move their arms, legs, neck and head to see normal ranges of movement? I don't know whether that was specific to the point of demonstration, Natalie, or if you have a comment on that.
I'm guessing that's probably an area where we could insert something like that into a helpful hint to give care staff some further instructions about how they might check for that specific injury. So that's a good point.
Yeah. Next question from Vicky: how, when you produce the report, how are you identifying the patient? This was actually directly off the feedback from one of the care, or a few of the care homes, is a unique patient reference. So it means nothing to us. It only means something to the care home because each resident, this is in a care home setting, of course, each resident is allocated their own unique patient reference number. We've answered the max weight question. Right, we'll just find the next one. How long does training take for each care home and how many staff at a time? Great question. There's no probably sort of preset answer to that. It's very much dependent on the setting. What we are very aware of is that training is a very important part in terms of the implementation and the embedding of something like this. And we would normally take the approach of training a smaller group of people within a care home, be that the senior management team or the trainers. And so we would give them kind of a really detailed overview and also support them with a number of resources, like a sort of a training pack, if you like, which they can then use to cascade the training to the rest of the staff. But obviously, it very much is dependent on what each system needs. Some will have a dedicated care home training team, in which case our involvement is probably limited, and it's a case of training that central team to then go and disseminate that training. Question from Liz: is NHS England willing to provide match or any funding? Interesting question. Obviously, there has been the funding released from the Going Further for Winter, which each system's got a range of amount of money. I believe that's mainly for capital purchases. To answer your question in simple black and white, no, I'm not aware of any match funding for the tool.
The one other funding stream that may be relevant specifically to HelpFall is, I need to just confirm the name of it and pop it in the chat, but it's the digitalisation stream that comes from the HCS as opposed to NHS.
Yeah, I mean, it's abundantly clear from the conversations that we've been having with different systems is that once something like this is so well proven, the funding, I guess the business case then becomes a lot easier for the systems to present. I think that's it from both of us in terms of the questions. Obviously, you've got our details and we'll be sending around relevant bits of information from there. So a massive thank you from us for joining. The recording and slides will be sent round after this webinar. And if you want further details or want to reach out to us, you know where we are, and we'll happily tailor, build whatever it is that you require for your system. Thank you very much, and that brings us to the end of the presentation.